We all remember the adrenaline rush of watching our favorite action films, the explosions, the high-stakes stunts, the heroes defying death with impossible feats. Yet behind every meticulously choreographed punch and perfectly timed jump lies a hidden world, a shadow of what might have been. Imagine discovering that the version you've seen on screen is only half the story, that somewhere, in the archives or international markets, exists an entirely different cut, bolder, bloodier, or even radically altered. What if the film you thought you knew had a twin, quietly shot in parallel, but never meant for your eyes? Some of these films were reimagined for different audiences. Others were altered due to censorship, test screenings, or the personal whims of directors who insisted on experimenting with tone, pacing, or endings. Scenes that made one version shocking or unforgettable were often softened or excised entirely from the widely released cut. A fight that seemed daring on your screen may have been even deadlier in the version no one saw. A death diffused in one cut could have been mercilessly graphic in another. Throughout cinema history, filmmakers have faced choices between artistry, marketability, and audience sensibilities. Sometimes, the differences were subtle: a few seconds of extra footage, an alternative angle, or a slightly different musical cue. Other times, entire sequences were rewritten, reshot, or completely excised. And while casual audiences remained blissfully unaware, these twin versions offer a glimpse into the messy, fascinating process behind the scenes. In this countdown, we're delving into 15 action films that exist in duality. Some were shot twice for international markets. Others were reimagined after test screenings revealed unexpected reactions, and a few were never released in their original form at all. You might think you know these movies, but what you've seen is only half the story. Let's dive into 15 action movies with behind-the-scenes chaos, twists, and secrets you've never heard of. Fact Hasson. Midnight Man, 1995. Imagine a city at night, neon lights reflecting off wet asphalt, and a lone figure navigating a labyrinth of alleyways while bullets ricochet around him. Midnight Man was originally conceived as a gritty, international action thriller. In 1995, during its production, two versions of the film were shot almost simultaneously: the domestic American cut and the international cut, which ran 20 minutes longer. The American studio, worried about ratings and audience sensitivities, demanded the removal of several intense sequences, scenes of hand-to-hand combat soaked in sweat and blood, daring rooftop chases, and a sequence where the lead actor narrowly escapes a collapsing bridge. Ironically, the international version retained every frame, including the sequences that pushed the boundaries of physical risk and narrative tension. Actors recalled performing stunts that were later truncated, their sweat and strain unseen by domestic audiences. The lead actor, determined to maintain authenticity, insisted on executing a rooftop leap without safety wires, a feat that made it into the international cut but vanished entirely from the American release. The discrepancy between the two versions not only altered pacing but fundamentally changed the perceived stakes of the story. What's more, audiences in Europe and Asia would later discover a more brutal, raw portrayal of the protagonist, one that made the American version feel almost sanitized. And yet, few in the US would ever glimpse this hidden iteration. The fact that an entire world had experienced Midnight Man differently remains a testament to how studio choices and censorship can obscure cinematic truth. But that wasn't the only time reality fractured into fiction. Fact #2. The Order, 2001. In 2001, The Order presented a narrative of crime and betrayal that seemed straightforward. But behind the camera, directors and producers were grappling with an unusual dilemma: cultural sensitivity. Two endings were filmed, one for the international market and another tailored specifically for Middle Eastern audiences. In the domestic cut, the finale is dark, with vengeance served cold, and the main antagonist meeting a shocking demise. In the alternative ending, violence was softened, motives clarified, and a morally ambiguous resolution was replaced with a more conciliatory conclusion to comply with regional norms. Test audiences in Los Angeles and London reacted differently from those in Dubai and Riyadh. While Western viewers appreciated the moral ambiguity and intensity, regional feedback suggested discomfort with scenes that depicted extreme violence and ethical gray zones. Directors reshot dialogue, rearranged sequences, and adjusted visual cues to match local expectations. Interestingly, both versions were technically completed and screened. But only the international cut reached Western theaters, leaving most viewers unaware of the subtler, more restrained ending crafted for other markets. This duality created an unusual cinematic phenomenon. The film's narrative could change dramatically depending on which version one saw. A character's arc might feel tragic in one cut, heroic in another. And while the studio rarely acknowledged these differences publicly, fans who discovered the alternate ending online often remarked on how much it changed the entire tone of the movie. But even more striking examples of alternate filming would appear later in this countdown. Fact #3. Night of the Warrior, 1991. Night of the Warrior is remembered as a cult action thriller, yet what most audiences saw is far from the whole story. The film was shot in 991, simultaneously producing a European version and an American release. The European cut included several explicit sequences, a few minutes of nudity, intricate fight choreography that pushed physical boundaries, and scenes of torture that heightened tension to an almost unbearable degree. When the studio prepared the U.S. release, executives opted to remove or trim these sequences, fearing backlash from American censors and mainstream audiences. Actors recalled long, grueling shoots for scenes that never appeared in the domestic cut. One stunt performer executed a full-scale hand-to-hand combat sequence atop a moving vehicle, which was reduced to a few seconds for U.S. audiences. Cinematographers noted that lighting and camera angles were crafted differently between versions, emphasizing grit and realism for European audiences while softening intensity for the American market. Ironically, some of these omitted sequences would later become cult material when European VHS and DVD copies circulated, revealing a side of the film entirely unknown to most U.S. viewers. The dual versions illustrate how film perception can hinge on what's left unseen. A movie familiar to millions can harbor hidden depths, entirely contingent on geography and studio decisions. Even the smallest edits, a few frames of impact, a subtle reaction shot can fundamentally shift a character's arc and the audience's emotional engagement. And yet, the story of alternate versions doesn't end here. Fact #4. The Base 2. Guilty as Charged, 2000. The Base 2. Guilty as Charged was marketed as a high-octane sequel, but its production carried a hidden layer few audiences would ever see. During filming in 2000, the team created two separate versions, the American release and a Canadian cut designed for home audiences. While the story remained consistent, subtle yet powerful changes were made. The Canadian cut featured an alternate soundtrack and voiceover, which transformed the tone of entire sequences. Explosions felt more menacing, stunts more desperate, and the pacing delivered a more intense experience. Actors remembered performing the same sequences twice, once with cues and intensity geared for the American version, and again for the Canadian cut, with subtle adjustments to timing and delivery. Directors experimented with camera angles to emphasize grit in the Canadian cut, creating tension that the U.S. release simply did not convey. Ironically, most critics and audiences judged the film solely on the American cut, unaware that the Canadian version amplified the narrative stakes and transformed character motivations in subtle but profound ways. Even decades later, fans who stumbled upon the Canadian VHS editions reported that the film felt like an entirely different experience. Moments of action that seemed restrained in theaters came alive with visceral energy, reminding viewers that the official version is rarely the definitive experience. And yet, for the majority, this alternate cut remained buried in obscurity, a hidden mirror reflecting what the filmmakers had truly envisioned. Fact #5. The Peacekeeper, 1997. Released in 1997, The Peacekeeper was another example of a film existing in dual realities. The first VHS release included a dramatic scene featuring a massive explosion inside a secure facility. For television syndication, however, the studio modified the scene, removing key shots and re-editing the sequence to comply with broadcast standards. The difference between versions was striking. The theatrical cut radiated chaos and danger, while the TV cut felt comparatively subdued, almost sanitized. Crew members recalled shooting multiple angles of the explosion with different timing and pyrotechnic effects to ensure maximum impact. Special effects teams meticulously adjusted debris, smoke, and lighting for each version. Actors described performing with heightened urgency for the theatrical version, knowing that cameras would capture every fraction of a second in excruciating detail. In contrast, the television cut demanded fewer takes and emphasized continuity over danger. The result was a subtle yet profound shift in audience perception. Where one version felt adrenaline-fueled, the other offered restraint, demonstrating how even minor editorial changes can reshape a film's tension. For many viewers, the TV audience, the high-stakes chaos of the original sequence remained invisible. Yet those who discovered the VHS original encountered a more visceral, daring experience that contrasted sharply with the version they had long accepted as canonical. Fact 16. Midnight Run, 1988. Midnight Run is celebrated for its thrilling chase sequences and dynamic performances, but it too has a lesser-known parallel existence. During production in 1988, several sequences were filmed twice, one intended for theatrical release and another for television broadcast. Key action scenes, particularly high-speed car chases and rooftop confrontations, were trimmed and toned down for TV, removing perilous stunts that actors risked performing without digital enhancement. Crew members later recalled that the lead actor executed stunts atop moving vehicles without harnesses for the theatrical version. Cameras captured every risky leap, emphasizing danger and tension, yet these details were reduced for domestic television, softening the intensity. Editors worked carefully to retain narrative coherence while removing moments deemed too violent or risky for broadcast standards. This duality created an invisible gap in audience experience. Those who saw the TV version missed the full extent of the actor's physical commitment and the production's ambition. In effect, Midnight Run exists as two films, one adrenaline, charged, visceral, and raw. The other carefully curated to adhere to censorship and safety standards. Such contrasts illustrate how even acclaimed action films can harbor hidden layers, only visible to those who seek out alternate cuts. Fact 7. Double Impact, 1991. Double Impact, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, is widely remembered for its dual-role spectacle and high-octane action sequences. Yet few know that two distinct endings were filmed to cater to different markets. The domestic U.S. cut concluded with a tense showdown, leaving the antagonist's fate ambiguous, a choice intended to provoke discussion and suspense. For international audiences, an alternate ending was shot, providing a more definitive resolution, where justice was visibly served and key character arcs were emphasized. The alternate ending required reshooting several scenes with nuanced performances. Van Damme described feeling challenged to convey slightly different emotional tones for the same sequences, subtle shifts in intensity, expression, and timing. Directors also modified camera angles, pacing, and background tension to align with cultural expectations, creating two cinematic experiences from the same core footage. Ironically, the international cut conveyed a cleaner narrative but sacrificed some of the moral complexity that made the US version compelling. Fans who eventually discovered both endings online noted how dramatically the film's emotional impact shifted. A moment that seemed unresolved and edgy in one cut felt satisfying and conclusive in the other. Double Impact stands as a striking example of how a single film can deliver divergent storytelling experiences, depending entirely on which version reaches viewers. Fact 8. Bloodsport, 1988. Bloodsport has become an iconic martial arts film. But what many fans never realized is that some of the most intense fight sequences existed in a separate international cut. During production, Jean-Claude Van Damme and the stunt team performed high-risk combat sequences with minimal safety measures. For the US release, several of these moments were shortened or toned down, reducing visible impact and altering the narrative rhythm. International markets, particularly in Asia and Europe, retained the uncut fight scenes, presenting a grittier, more visceral depiction of martial arts mastery. Close-ups on strikes, spins, and injuries emphasized physical stakes, creating tension absent in the American theatrical release. Editors also incorporated longer reaction shots, intensifying suspense and providing audiences with a raw, almost documentary-like perspective of the fights. The dual versions drastically affected audience perception. While US viewers experienced a streamlined, approachable martial arts spectacle, international audiences witnessed the full physical toll and skill level of the performers. This disparity demonstrates how minor edits, driven by censorship or marketing considerations, can transform a film's perceived intensity and character depth. And while Bloodsport remains celebrated, its true intensity lives in a version many have never seen. Fact 19. Rapid Fire, 1992. Released in 1992, Rapid Fire starred Brandon Lee and featured elaborate martial arts sequences combined with gunplay. Behind the scenes, the film was shot with two cuts in mind, one for U.S. theaters and another for international markets. While the narrative remained consistent, key sequences were re-edited to cater to audience sensitivity and pacing preferences. Some explosive stunts and fight sequences were slightly shortened in the U.S. cut, whereas the international version retained full-length choreography, amplifying the thrill. Brandon Lee and the stunt team performed high-risk maneuvers repeatedly to capture every angle needed for both versions. Lighting, camera positions, and pacing were subtly adjusted to create slightly different moods. The U.S. cut emphasized narrative, clarity, and accessibility, while the international cut amplified spectacle and adrenaline. Critics and fans have noted that these differences affect not only the film's rhythm but also the perceived courage and skill of the performers. The dual existence of Rapid Fire illustrates how even commercially successful films often hide alternative realities that drastically alter audience experience. Viewers unknowingly consuming the US version missed out on sequences designed to push action boundaries, leaving a richer, risk-laden interpretation of the film largely unseen. Fact: Hasson 0. Lethal Weapon 41998. Lethal Weapon 4 is celebrated for its blend of action and dark humor, but behind the camera, the production created multiple cuts that few ever saw. Certain action sequences were filmed differently to accommodate both domestic theaters and international markets. In particular, high-risk chase sequences and shootouts were shot with alternate angles and extended takes for international audiences, emphasizing suspense and the stakes of danger. Mel Gibson and Danny Glover performed physically demanding stunts with minimal safety modifications for the international version. Camera crews employed wider shots to capture the complexity of each maneuver, while editors for the domestic release trimmed sequences for pacing, prioritizing narrative flow over visceral impact. This divergence created two subtly distinct films, one that thrilled with intense physicality and tension, the other streamlined for storytelling and comedic timing. Film historians and fans later discovered that sequences cut from U.S. theaters added not only raw action but also deepened character dynamics, highlighting the performer's commitment to realism. The dual versions show that even high-budget Hollywood productions may exist in parallel realities, each shaping audience perception differently. And the world of alternate takes and secret versions doesn't end here. Fact: Hasson. The Substitute 21998. The Substitute 2, released in 1998, continued the saga of a relentless mercenary teaching unconventional lessons. For international audiences, certain sequences were extended or slightly altered to enhance tension and highlight action choreography. Scenes that were truncated for the American release showcased more intense fight sequences, emphasizing the physical risk undertaken by actors and stunt performers. The director recalled that the lead actor insisted on performing a stunt involving a high fall from a balcony, captured fully in the international cut but shortened for U.S. viewers. Cinematographers and editors also adjusted lighting, framing, and pacing to heighten suspense overseas, producing a version that felt grittier and more visceral. U.S. audiences, meanwhile, saw a cleaner, faster-paced cut focused on story clarity. These subtle yet significant differences influenced how viewers perceived both danger and heroism. Fans who sought out the international version reported a heightened sense of peril, a raw display of action, and moments of tension missing from the domestic cut. The duality demonstrates that even sequels, often dismissed as formulaic, may hide untold versions that radically alter the cinematic experience. Fact: Hasson 2. Universal Soldier. The Return, 1999. Universal Soldier. The Return, 1999, pushed the boundaries of futuristic action with high-tech stunts and explosive sequences. Behind the scenes, two versions were produced, one for theatrical release and another for home video distribution. Some action sequences, particularly those involving robotics and pyrotechnics, were extended or intensified for the home video version, offering a more immersive experience. Director Mike Rogers described reshooting certain sequences to include additional stunt work and visual effects for the alternate cut. Actors performed complex fight choreography and wire work that would be trimmed in the US theater release. The extended version amplified both the suspense and physical stakes, revealing more of the performer's skill and the intricacy of stunt coordination. The discrepancy between versions subtly affected the film's tone and audience engagement. While domestic viewers experienced a streamlined action narrative, home video audiences encountered a richer, more thrilling depiction of heroism and peril. Universal Soldier. The return illustrates how even modern, effects-driven films can harbor hidden layers that transform the viewing experience, rewarding those who explore beyond the mainstream release. Fact Raute 1-3. Sudden Death, 1995. Sudden Death is widely celebrated for its intense hockey arena standoff, yet it conceals a lesser-known parallel existence. During production in 1995, sequences were filmed twice. One cut intended for American theaters, another for international markets. The alternate take preserved more high-risk stunts and extended fight choreography, highlighting the physical danger faced by Jean-Claude Van Damme. In the international cut, actors performed additional sequences without stunt doubles, including dangerous leaps across catwalks and pyrotechnic-laden explosions. These moments were trimmed or modified in the US release to meet domestic safety guidelines and maintain a PG-13 or R-appropriate rating. Editors also altered timing, reaction shots, and background tension to subtly shift audience perception of suspense and heroism. The effect was a significant divergence in experience. Viewers who watched the domestic cut saw a streamlined, fast-paced thriller, while the international version delivered heightened intensity and risk. Critics and fans who discovered the alternate sequences later noted how they transformed the perceived stakes, making the hero's bravery feel more palpable. This example underscores how editing choices and audience targeting can create hidden layers in otherwise familiar action films. Fact Hasson 4. Hard Target, 1993. Hard Target, directed by John Woo, is renowned for its stylized gunfights and martial arts sequences. Yet the film was produced with multiple cuts to satisfy international and domestic expectations. Certain extended action scenes, particularly rooftop chases and perilous stunts, were shot and edited differently for overseas audiences, amplifying risk and tension. Jean-Claude Van Damme and his stunt team performed high-risk sequences, including wire-assisted jumps and rooftop confrontations, with limited digital safety enhancements. While domestic audiences experienced a version focused on clarity and pacing, international viewers received a cut that retained additional stunt footage, longer reaction shots, and more explosive choreography. Cinematographers emphasized dynamic framing and motion in the international version, heightening suspense and physical stakes. The dual existence of Hard Target highlights how subtle editorial and directorial decisions can dramatically change viewer experience. Those familiar only with the US release may have underestimated the level of physical risk and choreographic precision performed on set. Meanwhile, overseas audiences enjoyed a raw, more visceral depiction, offering a stark contrast between perception and reality. Fact Cardinalum 5. Desperado, 1995. Desperado, Robert Rodriguez's stylish revenge saga, also hides a dual identity. In addition to the American theatrical release, international cuts preserved alternate action sequences and slightly different shootouts. Extended gunfight sequences, explosions, and character reactions were included to enhance tension, while the US version trimmed these moments for pacing and continuity. Rodriguez, committed to visual storytelling, ensured that key stunts and choreographed fights were captured from multiple angles. Actors performed stunts repeatedly to accommodate both versions, resulting in subtle shifts in intensity, framing, and timing. The international cut amplified the physical danger and stylistic flourishes, creating a more visceral experience for viewers outside the US. Fans who discovered the alternate version noted that these differences transformed the cinematic rhythm, making the film feel even more daring and chaotic. Desperado exemplifies how even well-known action classics may exist in multiple realities, each delivering unique thrills, challenges, and perspectives that remain invisible to most audiences. Bonus fact: the lost cut of Cliffhanger, 1993. This one didn't make the top 15, but it might just be the strangest of all. During the production of Cliffhanger, Sylvester Stallone and the stunt team filmed an alternate sequence for the perilous mountaintop rescue that never reached audiences. The original cut included longer, more intricate stunts, actors dangling from precarious ledges, ropes snapping perilously, and a helicopter maneuver that was far more aggressive than the theatrical release. The studio intervened, fearing insurance liabilities and potential ratings issues, and mandated significant edits. Entire sequences were trimmed or reshot with additional safety measures, effectively removing much of the tension and risk that made the original scenes pulse with danger. Crew members recall Stallone insisting on performing certain climbs and jumps himself, believing that authenticity would heighten suspense. Some shots from these sequences were later preserved only in international versions or hidden reels, never fully incorporated into the widely distributed film. Ironically, fans who stumbled upon bootleg copies of the lost cut described it as a near-different film. Action felt raw, stakes higher, and the hero's peril far more palpable. It serves as a reminder that even blockbuster productions can conceal secret versions, hidden for safety, marketing, or cultural reasons. The lost cliffhanger sequences highlight the unpredictable tension between artistic vision and practical constraints, offering a glimpse into what could have been and what the studio quietly decided audiences weren't ready to see. Which of these hidden versions surprised you the most? Do you think the studios made the right choice by limiting what audiences saw? Or did they rob viewers of the full thrill? Some stunts were performed without safety nets, some endings rewritten for international markets, and yet most of us only experienced a fraction of the original vision. Share your thoughts. Which alternate cut would you hunt down if you could see it in full? And tell us, what's the most intense action scene you've ever witnessed on screen, real or edited, theatrical or hidden?